While viewing this film, it is important to note that terminology and the understanding of disability is not uniform across cultures. What might be an acceptable phrase, term, or practice in one culture may not be acceptable in another.
Yet another chapter in a never-ending story. It's a part that deals with love and life and hope and fate and glory. Now that you have my undivided admiration, may we continue with our lonely heart creation.
Whatever your disability, no, let me rephrase that. Whatever your difference is, it doesn't matter. We're all unique. Everyone has the ability to go abroad.
The University of Pittsburgh has a long-standing tradition of innovative support services for students with disabilities. It also proudly fosters the international education of its students. In 2004, Carol Larson, Assistant Director of Pitt's Study Abroad Office, or SAO, noticed an increasing number of students with disabilities interested in studying overseas. Could a student with a disability, whether hidden or apparent, have a successful study abroad experience? What preparation would be needed to ensure for proper accommodations? The SAO and Pitt's Disability Resources and Services Center, or DRS, decided to work together to craft an innovative formula for advising a student with disabilities on how to study abroad. Lynette Van Slyke, Director of Pitt's DRS, worked closely with Carol to form a plan.
This relationship began a few years ago when a student with a hidden disability came up to see Carol Larson.
We initially set up an education program where she would come and instruct those of us in the office what did it mean to have a disability, whether that disability was visible or invisible.
Tara, a student with bipolar disorder, was one of the first Pitt students to express interest in going abroad.
My disability advisor, Noreen, had informed me that it was very possible for me to study abroad and that there was a bridge being built between the study abroad office and the disability office.
As the relationship between the two offices matured, Carol and Lynette crafted the team management approach in practice today.
When a student with a disability expresses an interest in studying abroad, the disability specialist working with that student will coordinate a meeting among herself, the student with the disability, and the study abroad advisor. When having all three parties together, this allows for more honest conversation to occur about the student's disability or medical condition and its potential impact while studying abroad. I think it's fair to say that typically most study abroad advisors don't have an in-depth knowledge of disability and appropriate accommodations, and that most disability specialists don't have an in-depth knowledge of study abroad.
By opening up the lines of communication, the Study Abroad Office gained a much more intimate understanding of what it meant to be a student with a disability, and of the extra care required to select a suitable program and country. While some disabilities are apparent, most are not. These include learning disabilities, psychological disorders, and medical conditions, among others. Freya, who studied in both Brazil and Argentina, did not consider her diabetes as a special need, until she arrived and realized that she could have done more to prepare for her time abroad.
Before I left, it would have been helpful to know that despite being in a small town that had a pharmacy on every block, I was not able to find lancets, which are tiny needles that you use to prick your finger and test your blood sugar.
Matt, a student with a visual impairment, studied abroad in both Argentina and Brazil.
I'm not saying don't plan for things or think things through when you go abroad, but do so knowing that there are always things you won't anticipate. Some of those things will be really amazing, and some of those things will be really, really tough.
Carrie, a student with bipolar disorder who studied in India, and Greg, a student with a hearing impairment who studied on semester at sea and in the United Arab Emirates, explain the steps they took prior to departure.
You just have to be prepared. First thing is hearing aid batteries aren't usually very easy to find everywhere else in the world. So I made sure I had enough of a stock of hearing batteries before I left.
The month before I went to India, I met with my therapist at least once a week, and we talked about all kinds of situations that could arise and how I should handle them if they did.
Brennan, a student with dyslexia who studied in Spain, offered these words of encouragement.
I think it's important for students to feel comfortable with the fact that they're leaving the Disability Act. Here I feel very secure. I know I'm going to get my accommodations because there's an act that says I do.
There are literally thousands of programming options. One of the most popular ways for students to study abroad is to use organizations like ISA, AIFS, IFSA Butler, CEA, API, and Study Australia, referred to as Study Abroad program providers.
I think there are definite advantages to working with a third-party provider because in many cases we have been on site, we have seen what is offered to that student in the country that they have chosen. We know the people who are on site. We can make a phone call. This way the most minute detail can be worked out before the student goes on the program. There are in some cases parts of a program that a student may not be able to do. It is far better to put that out there in the very early stages before the student has planned on a specific program.
To illustrate how important it is for information to be shared with the program providers, the University of Pittsburgh sent 2 staff members on location to speak with resident directors and staff in Spain, Ireland, and England. Maite Catalina, resident director of ISA programs in Barcelona, explains what information is helpful to program providers.
The most important information is about the reality of the students. When one student needs something special, it's better to know in advance because we can be ready for helping, for give the student the correct support.
Some program providers place students directly into host universities. It is then also essential to determine the host university's preparedness for a student with a disability. The University of Pompeu Fabra, renovated in 1990, UPF is a composite mix of old and new buildings. The campus itself has been designed to suit the needs of students with disabilities. Likewise, the very friendly staff at UPF showed their willingness to help the students as they negotiate the campus and adjust to life in Spain. While there are parts of Barcelona that would be difficult to navigate for someone with limited mobility, the city has taken significant strides to modernize. Angel Pacheco, director of ISA's European programs, elaborates.
Well, after the Olympics, Barcelona has changed a lot. It's much moderner, it's much more prepared for the new life, the new age.
Another important consideration while choosing a study abroad program is housing. Matt, who lived with a host family in Argentina, and Michelle, who lived with a host family in Spain, discussed some of the advantages.
I lived alone in an apartment with other students during the first month of my stay. And I went everywhere alone, and I cooked my own food, and I did my own shopping. And by the end of the first month, I realized that in addition to all my classwork, it was way too much stress that I wanted to deal with. So I decided to move in with a host family, and that was the best decision I made while I was down there.
The support system when you're living with a host family instead of just with a bunch of other, friends that you find here is a lot different because the family already knows what it's like, how the stores work, how to get around with the buses, how to, use the metro, what places to go to for what kinds of things, what places not to go to.
In Barcelona, program providers stressed how heavily they rely on the information from a student's home university. Program providers then have the responsibility of relaying this information to disability offices in the host universities. To illustrate the relationship between program provider and host institution, the University of Pittsburgh staff visited the University of College Cork in Cork, Ireland. Disclosing a disability at the application stage will not have any impact on a student's acceptance into a program. Rather, as Avril Hutch, CEA's on-site director in Cork, explains, disclosing during the application stage plays a significant role in the planning of a program.
We do like to make sure the students know everything before they come, so they get a lot of literature from us as well as from the Disability Support Office. If the student mentions they have a disability, then we'll forward that straight on to the Disability Office and they'll recommend how best to help that student out.
Linda Dolan, an advisor at UCC's Disability Services Office, explains some of the accommodations that could be made for students who choose to study there.
In UCC, the students have an option of a note taker, so a note taker will go into the lecture for them. Some students like that, some prefer to be independent. So you would have some students who prefer to take their own notes. A lot of the lecturers now in UCC are putting their notes on Blackboard so the student can actually download the notes. So they just go in then and supplement that with their own. So this would be a Braille and Speak, so it would allow the student to take their own notes if they're a Braille user. We have a few students, again, who like to be independent and they'll use a digital dictaphone to actually record their lectures. And then they can transfer the files onto their laptop. This is something that we've just started to use this year, and it's called a book courier. So this would be an MP3 player for a blind student, so it's accessible. Okay, so basically they'd use compact flash memory. Okay, so we would scan material for them and then they can put it on here. So it means they're no longer stuck to the computer. They can go off on the train and listen to their economics book because we would scan it for them. They can also record voice on here, so if they want to take notes they can record that. We got a new printer this year, it's called a Tiger Embosser, and so it allows us to print out in Braille. So you can see there's Braille underneath here with the text, and then if you feel this, the colours are actually feel differently, so they can actually get the sense of the pie chart and the information.
The UCC also offers a variety of computer programs designed to assist a student with a disability. While technology and other accommodations can aid in a student's successful navigation of the academic program, it is also crucial for students to develop a social network. Mariel, a UCC student with dyslexia, shares her advice for students with disabilities who choose Cork.
The only thing I would say to students coming over here is that don't focus just on the academic. I think that happens to people who have a disability a lot of the time, more so than other students. Don't miss out on the whole college experience because there's so many clubs and societies, especially here in Cork.
Catherine, who chose Cork over other colleges in Ireland, explains the evolution of the city since her arrival.
Over the last couple of years now, it has vastly improved. Patrick Street is all accessible. the main parts, Oliver Plunkett Street now was desperate. It was very, very bad. And I was here like for 4 years and I was never on it, but it's all changed now. They've all resurfaced it, and it's wonderful.
As we have seen, information flows first from the Study Abroad Office and the Disability Resources and Services Center to the program providers. It then passes to the Disability Office at the host university. Only when this chain is complete can adequate accommodation be made for a student's individual needs. London is one of the most popular places to study abroad. It is also an old city and not 100% accessible for those with limited mobility. But all large cities have pros and cons, as Paul Jarman, Learning Development Officer for Students with Disabilities at Queen Mary College, explains.
What is particularly suitable for one group of disabled people can often be particularly unsuitable for another. You may have spotted around London there's now an awful lot of dropped curbs, because obviously we're setting up more ramps on the edge of curbs for wheelchair users, which is a fantastic thing. But it makes life very difficult for the blind, because it's very hard to train guide dogs when you don't have actual physical curbs, because guide dogs tend to depend upon them as a sort of a physical thing to look for. So that's a particularly good example of the way in which what suits some doesn't necessarily suit others.
The Institute for Study Abroad, Butler's London office, has worked successfully with many students with disabilities. While it is necessary for students to spend anywhere from 6 to 12 months in preparation for a student abroad program, Lynn Alvarez, Director of Student Services, and Andrew Williams, the Academic Director, describe a case where information was not communicated in time.
Yes, we recently had a student who didn't disclose the severity of her sight impairment. I think we were led to believe that she could actually see, but it turned out that she couldn't, and she needed a lot of preparation. And unfortunately, by not releasing that information to our staff in the States, and then finally telling us, I think 2 months before she was due to come over, it was a little late for us to put all the wheels in motion. I think the host university here were alarmed because they didn't have enough time to prepare, and we certainly didn't either.
If we had known in advance, we could have organised special rooms for her, we could have organised people to look after her, to walk her around, but because she hadn't really told us this information and was rather reticent about coming forward, she was withholding, it made it difficult for us then to be able to provide things for her.
Most universities in London, including the University of Westminster, are urban campuses where students live and take their classes in the heart of London.
There is one college in London that is fairly well established as being wheelchair accessible, which would be Queen Mary.
Martina, a Polish student studying at Queen Mary, chose it over all other European schools because of its ability to accommodate her needs.
Yes, campus is absolutely brilliant. That was one of the reasons why I chose Queen Mary in the first place, because I heard that it had the biggest campus in London, and I visited it before I applied, and I realized that it was really good for wheelchair users. There are no hills, no stairs, and basically the students' village is just next to the college itself. So I have absolutely no problem with moving around by myself.
I think by coming here, you also will, in your own way, improve the facilities that we have for a number of reasons. Firstly, because disabled students who come from other countries bring completely different cultural expectations of disability to this country.
Outside of London, some other universities in the UK are well suited to accommodate students with disabilities. Aptly situated on the outskirts of Norwich, a thriving city north of London, is the University of East Anglia, or UEA. Dan, a student with tetraplegia, has thoroughly enjoyed his time there.
I think the UEA is a particularly good university in terms of academia, but also in terms of disabled access. Most of the buildings were built in the 1960s and most of them put disabled access in then.
The universities and providers in England were as welcoming as those in Spain and Ireland, encouraging students with disabilities to experience culture and life in another country.
It's become very, very clear to me that one person in a study abroad office doesn't send a student abroad.
I think we recognize that all three offices had a wealth of information to bring to the student's experience. The study abroad office, the disability office, and the program provider. And we realized that by bringing these entities together, we could discuss the student's disability and the potential for the best experience possible.
My study abroad experience absolutely affected how I cope with bipolar disorder. I learned a lot about myself in India, and I gained a lot more confidence while I was there. I learned how to deal with situations that I never thought I would have to deal with, and because of it, I never think to myself anymore, I don't know if I can handle that. This was the scariest, most difficult thing I've ever done in my life so far, and it ended up to be the most exciting experience of my life.
I learned to rely on others as resources, to utilize people, and work to nullify my limitations rather than fighting against them. It's ironic that I had to go abroad to understand this.
If I could tell just one more thing to someone, is someone with a disability, don't be afraid that you have a disability, and know that people are there to help as long as you're willing to ask for it. And just go abroad. I mean, what else can I say? Go abroad. There's nothing else that's better.
It is the hope of Pitt's Study Abroad office that students, faculty, advisors in disability services, study abroad offices, and program providers will share this message with each other and open the lines of communication that are necessary to make this underrepresented population underrepresented no longer.